The trial of Martin and Gerald Thornton has now reached its final stages. Yesterday, the court heard from Mrs. Madge Gorman how she was present in the house of the Thorntons after Alexander Reed was severely wounded, and saw them hide a shotgun in their mother's bed while the house was being searched by the police, and then remove the gun to a wardrobe that had already been searched. The defence has alleged that Reed was in fact shot accidentally by his lodger, William Johnson. Martin Thornton, the elder of the two accused, is now in the witness box.
We're good Christians in our house, and some of those things you wouldn't want to see or hear.
Abusive expressions and slogans?
Yes.
Did you know who had done this?
Reed, sir.
How did you know that?
Well, it was obvious, sir. Who else would have done it?
Now, what was your reaction to this vandalism?
Our mother was very upset about it, so the first thing we did was to take her upstairs and to put her to bed. Then I had a bit of a row with my brother as to what to do next. He was all for going to the police straight away and telling them about the mess that they'd made.
And what did you resolve?
Beg your pardon, sir?
What did you decide to do?
Well, I wanted to go and see Reed. I thought if I got there straight away he might admit to doing it. And then my brother said, all right, but not to get into anything with him, just to face him with it. And if he didn't own up to it, then we'd go to the police and tell them about the lorry business and the Betts business as well. So I went across.
Alone?
Yes, sir.
And Reed answered the door?
Yes, sir, almost so quickly he was expecting it. Before I had the words out of my mouth, he was denying that he had anything to do with it, which goes to prove that he had in fact done it, doesn't it?
Well, it certainly suggests it. Now, did you lay hold of Reed for any reason, or strike him in any way?
I might have pulled at him, sir. I wanted him to come out and to see the mess that he'd made, but he kept on saying that it had nothing to do with him, and...
And what?
Well, he was calling me a bloody Irish savage and a Catholic git and that.
I see. Go on, please.
The next thing I noticed, sir, was Johnson came round the side of the house, and he had this gun in his hand, and he pointed at me and started telling me to F off back where I came from.
He was threatening you with his gun?
Sir, he wasn't pointing it at anybody else.
Now, Reed was still in the doorway?
Yes, sir. As though he knew Johnson meant business and was keeping out of the way.
And where was your brother while this was happening?
Well, he must have been watching to see what happened, sir, and he must have seen Johnson come round the side of the house with the gun, because he came up behind Johnson then and tried to get the gun off him, and it went off.
Accidentally?
It looked like that, sir, but Johnson wouldn't let go of the gun, so it went off a second time.
And which shot hit Reed?
I don't know, sir. I wasn't watching him at the time. I was just looking at the two of them struggling. So when I realised that Reed had been hit, I pulled them apart.
You pulled your brother and Johnson apart?
Yes.
And you left Johnson there with the gun?
Yes. What else could we have done, sir? We just went back to the house.
Did you make any attempt to find out what had happened to Reed?
No, sir. Well, he had Mrs. Gorman and Johnson there with him, and they wouldn't exactly have welcomed us.
But you were upset by what had happened?
Oh, yes, sir. I mean, we don't mind living a bit rough, but guns is another matter altogether.
Now, when did Mrs. Gorman come to your house?
About 20 minutes or so after that, she came to the back door and my brother let her in.
So who entertained Mrs. Gorman until the police arrived?
I was in the kitchen, sir. I didn't really see very much of her.
But you were on good terms with her, despite her leaving you for Reed?
It was me who left her, sir.
You hadn't been pursuing her, pestering her?
No, sir. It was the other way around. She was always after me.
Now, the police arrived and searched your home, but found no gun.
No, sir. There was no gun there for them to find.
You didn't hide a gun in the bed and then move it to the wardrobe, as has been suggested?
No, sir. If we had a gun, in any case, we would have had plenty of time to get rid of it, and... Well, if we had shot Reed, sir, we'd hardly be sitting in the kitchen drinking tea.
But you've heard the evidence of the police witnesses who state that they found gun cleaning equipment in your house. Now, what was that doing there?
Well, if we were breaking in a new site, say, out in the country, sir, sometimes we would take a gun along with us to clear away the rabbits and the rats and that sort of thing.
And what happened to that gun?
We sold it to one of the chaps working on the building site a couple of months earlier. We meant to take him out the oil and the brush as well, but he got another job and we couldn't trace him, so it was just lying there.
There's no question of your possessing a gun on the night in question.
None at all, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Thornton.
Miss Tate?
Mr. Thornton, you have made several serious charges against Alexander Reed, who, as you well know, is unable to counter them. Firstly, this business of split loading.
Load splitting, miss.
Thank you, load splitting. The obtaining of false delivery notes, I believe. Now, surely such a fraudulent scheme would depend upon the cooperation of someone on the construction site.
Yes, it would.
And yet you have stated that although Reed was engaged in this practice, you refused this cooperation.
Yes.
Well, if Reed was engaged in such an undertaking, he could only have done it with your cooperation. You were the foreman, weren't you?
Yes, miss, but he didn't do it at any of our sites. I saw to that.
Well, how can you make such accusations?
It was common knowledge. He was doing it in other sites.
Why did you not report the matter to the police?
Well, we don't handle things that way.
Indeed. You prefer to handle things, the law, in your own way, then?
No, I didn't say that.
Nevertheless, you do seem to possess a curious reluctance to avail yourself of the forces of law and order. Now, what about this business of slogans and vandalism? Did you ever complain to the police about that?
Well, what could they have done about it, miss? They would never have been able to prove that it was him.
Could you have proved it?
It would, obvious. I mean, who else could it have been?
Is he the only person whose tracks you've crossed? Is it not a district with a long record of vandalism? We've heard the phones are always out of order.
Yes.
So it could have been anyone, couldn't it, if indeed it ever happened at all?
Happened all right, miss. And Reed and Johnson did it.
So Reed vandalised your home, and Reed was swindling the building contractors, and Reed was stealing your betting money, and yet on none of these cases did you report it to the police. Now that seems very odd.
Not at all, miss. You just don't do that sort of thing.
Well, what do? Shoot a man down? Now, I believe you said that you went straight home from the public house and your mother then went to bed. But according to Mrs. Gorman, it was your mother who opened the door to her.
My brother let her in. My mother was in bed and did not get out of it.
Then why should Mrs. Gorman say it was your mother?
Well, she might have been mistaken. She was in a terrible condition when she came over to the house.
How did your relationship with Mrs. Gorman end?
It had to.
Had to?
Yes. Well, I couldn't marry a divorced woman. In fact, she's not divorced yet anyway. She's just separated.
So she left you because you couldn't marry her?
It's the other way around, miss. I finished it.
But you have attempted to continue this relationship, indeed to the point of becoming something of a nuisance, according to Mrs. Gorman.
And that is not true.
But isn't that one of the reasons why you, in your drunken state, hammered on Reed's door that night?
I was not drunk, miss, and that had nothing to do with me going over to Reed's that night.
You've told us instead a pack of nonsense about tipped-over dustbins and rubbish through letterboxes, none of which, according to police evidence, was apparent in the light of day.
We cleaned it up, that's why, miss. We're clean people.
But as the police were there that night, why didn't you tell them about it?
It wouldn't have done any good.
Well, they could at least have witnessed its existence, could they not? Now, you expect us to believe that with Reed lying seriously injured and your mother unwell upstairs, you and your brother spent the time cleaning up the house?
Yes?
You were in the kitchen talking to your brother when Mrs. Gorman came.
Yes?
Then how could you have cleaned up the house?
We did it before she came over.
You went straight from the assault upon Reed and started clearing up and removing paint from walls? I think the jury are going to find some difficulty believing that. Mr. Thornton, the police found gun cleaning equipment in your house. How did that come to be there?
I've already said, miss, we sold the gun some months earlier and we meant to take the man the cleaning stuff as well.
Whose gun was it, yours or your brother's?
My brother's.
And were you present when it was sold?
No, it was his gun and he sold it. I saw him take it to work.
Did you see him sell the gun?
No, we don't work together. I work on a site on the hut on the site and he drives an excavator.
So you have no way of actually knowing whether he sold it or not?
I would have known, miss, because it would have been in the house.
Where was the cleaning equipment kept?
In the cupboard under the stairs.
Loose or contained in something?
In a case?
A gun case?
Yes.
The gun was taken from its case and carried loose to a building site for sale to some unknown and untraceable person. Isn't the truth of the matter that the gun never left your house until it was used to assault Alexander Reed? And that you, in the heat of the moment, neglected to get rid of that weapon. Now, isn't that the truth?
No, it isn't.
Well, I suggest it isn't, that what you were doing in the half hour after you committed this ghastly crime and Mrs. Gorman coming into the house was not clearing up this non-existent mess, but disposing of the weapon. Now, that's it, isn't it?
No.
Why did your mother have to answer the door to Mrs. Gorman? Because you weren't in the house?
My mother did not answer the door to Mrs. Gorman. My brother did.
Now, at the start of this fracas, you said that you attempted to pull Reed out of his house and into your garden. How far is it from Reed's front door to yours?
About 5 yards.
Is there a fence between?
A hedge and a fence, yes.
A hedge? So you would have had to pull him round that, wouldn't you? Now, how far would that make it?
About 20 yards.
You were going to pull Reed 20 yards. Do you think you could have done that against his will without a considerable amount of violence?
Well, I just wanted to face him with it.
Well, isn't it a bit unlikely that you would have succeeded?
You don't think that way at the time.
Well, how were you thinking at the time? Were you in a temper?
No, I just wanted to have it out with him. I'd already talked to my brother about it. In fact, he was in more of a temper than I was.
Was he indeed? So you were quite calm and collected when you deliberately laid hold on Mr. Reed and dragged him out from his doorstep, is that so?
No, I wouldn't say that.
Well, just what would you say? You first said you weren't in a temper, now you say you weren't calm and collected. Just what of these is it?
I wasn't in a temper. I just wanted to get things straight.
What exactly did you hope to achieve by dragging Reed out into your garden 20 yards?
I've already said I just wanted to face him with it.
Out in the open?
Yes. You can't argue in a doorway.
No. And the reason you wanted to pull him out was not to view your exterior decorations, but to set him up as a target for your brother, who was waiting with a gun. Now that's it, isn't it?